Erev Tov Rabotai, we are continuing with our Mishna Yomi Masechet Terumot. We're up to Perik Gimel Mishnah Chet. Today's Mishnah should be Leidun Nishmat, Neria ben Tzvedlana Aranbayev, and Eliyahu ben Burcha Israel of Minuchatam Megan Eden. Amen. This Mishnah today, Mishnah Chet, discusses what happens if somebody wanted to declare part of his produce Terumah or Maaser, but he misspoke and declared it a different tithe from what he had intended. Along with that, the Mishnah is going to address some similar cases in which someone wanted to make a declaration that would change the status of something, but his words did not match what he had in mind. Let us see the Mishnah. If someone separated a portion from his crop and intended to say it is terumah, but mistakenly said maaser v'amar terumah, or if he intended to say maaser but mistakenly said terumah, Olav amar shlamim, or if someone who wants to bring an animal as an offering intended to say it is an olah, but mistakenly said shlamim v'amar olah, or he intended to say shlamim but mistakenly said olah, she'eni nichnas lebayit zeh v'amar lazeh, or if someone intended to say I swear that I will not enter this house, referring to a particular house, but mistakenly said this house, referring to a different house, she'eni ne'ena lazeh v'amar lazeh, or if someone intended to say, I will not have benefit from the property of this person, but mistakenly said this person, referring to a different person, lo amar klum, in all of these cases he has said nothing, adshu pi v'libo shavin, because a statement is not legally binding unless one's mouth and one's mind are the same, meaning the words that come out of one's mouth must be consistent with the thoughts in his mind. If a person has one thing in his mind, but says something else, his statement has no legal force in halakha. And the Mefarshim explain, there seems to be a contradiction between two psukim that concern donating items to the Bet HaMikdash. On one hand, the Torah says in Sefer Dvarim, chapter 23, pasuk 24, Motzat svatecha tishmo v'asita, you shall observe and perform that which is expressed by your lips, which implies that a dedication is effective by speech. But on the other hand, the Torah refers to those who dedicate items as kol nediv lev, everyone whose heart motivated him, in Sefer Shemot, chapter 35, pasuk 22, which implies that they had dedicated the items in their hearts, which means in their minds, without speech. So the solution to this contradiction is that a statement made with one's mouth is legally binding only if it is consistent with the thoughts in one's mind. If one intended to say the words that came out of his mouth, his statement is effective. But if he intended to say other words, it is as though he said nothing. Now, although this rule was stated in regards to dedicating items to the Bet HaMikdash, it also applies to other legal statements like those listed in our Mishnah, designating Terumot and Maasrot, designating an animal as an offering, forbidding oneself to do an action, a shvuah, making an item forbidden to oneself, a neder. The Mefarshim bring down many poskim, many authorities hold that one can designate Terumot and Maasrot by means of thoughts alone without saying anything. However, it works only if you intended to start alone. If you wanted to make the designation with speech, like in our Mishnah's case, it is invalid unless his words match his thoughts. That is in Rabotai of Mishnah Chet. Mishnah Tet now is going to deal with the case of a goy, an idolater, who designates his own produce as terumah or maaser, or designates an animal as an offering. The Mishnah says, Ha'oved kochavim ba'akuti, an idolater and a kuti. Now we said many times, the Mefarshim tell us, the Kutis were a group of people who settled in Eretz Yisrael towards the end of the first Bet Mikdash era. When they were attacked by lions, they converted to Judaism in hope that this would save them. But after their conversion, they returned to many of their earlier beliefs and practices. More about this is brought in Sefer Melachim 2, Kings 2, chapter 17, verses 24 to 41. There's a disagreement among the Tanaim whether the conversion was sincere and therefore valid, or whether it was not sincere. That's brought down in Masechet Kiddushin, page 75b. The Tana of our Mishnah, who groups Kutis with Goyim, clearly holds the conversion was not valid. So the Mishnah says, Ha'oved kochavim ba'akuti, an idolater and a kuti, Terumatan terumah, their terumah, meaning terumah, they separate from their own produce, is valid terumah. Umasroten maaser, their maasrot, meaning maasrot, they separate from their own produce, are valid. Maasrot vekdeshan hekdesh, and their consecration of an animal as an offering is a valid consecration. And the Mefarshim tell us, Although a goy is not obligated to observe the laws of the Torah except for the 7 laws of Bnei Noach, if he designates terumot or maasrot, the designation is effective. Therefore, his terumah may not be eaten by a Jew unless he is a Kohen. His maaser is tevel unless terumat maaser is separated from it, and his maaser sheni may not be eaten by a Jew except in Yerushalayim or after it had been redeemed. The fact that a goy can designate terumot and maasrot is derived from his ability to consecrate animals as offerings, the source of which we'll say as we go on. The Mefarshim say the Mishnah must be referring to a goy who separated terumot and maasrot from his own produce, because we learned in the first Mishnah of this Masechet that a goy cannot tithe the produce of a Jew. Although a goy has the legal ability to designate terumah, like we learned here, he is unable to do so on behalf of a Jew because an idolater cannot serve as the shliach of a Jew. He cannot be a shliach because the Torah says, "Varimutem atem." Atem is bnei brit. It has to be people that are Jewish. According to this Mishnah, a goy's ownership of the land in Eretz Yisrael does not remove its sanctity. Therefore, the produce grown there is tevel and subject to all the laws of tithing. Although the goy himself has no obligation to observe these laws, his land is sacred and its produce must be treated as produce of Eretz Yisrael. And the Mishnah said their consecration of an animal as an offering is a valid consecration. And the Mefarshim tell us an animal that a goy designates may be offered on the Mizbech in the Beit HaMikdash. We learned this halakha out from Sefer Vayikra, chapter 22, pasuk 18, which says, Ish mi bet Yisrael o min nager b'Yisrael asher yekriv korbano. Any man, but the Torah says a man of the house of Israel and of the converts among Israel who will bring an offering. By repeating the word ish, a man, the Torah is teaching us that goyim too, idolaters, can consecrate animals and have them offered in the Beit HaMikdash. This is sourced in Masechet Chulin, page 13b. The Mishnah now discusses whether the law of Revi'ai, which we said 4th year produce, applies to grapes that grew in the land owned by a goy. Revi'ai, again, we spoke about, is fruits that grow in the 4th year of a tree's existence. The fruits of its first 3 years are known as olah, and no benefit can be had from them. That's in Sefer Vayikra, chapter 19, pasuk 23. The fruits of the 4th year are permitted, but they are sacred. They must either be eaten in Yerushalayim or redeemed with money, which is then taken to Yerushalayim and used to purchase food that is eaten there. The law of Olah applies to all fruit trees. However, there's a machloket in the Gemara, Masechet Berachot, page 35a, as to whether the law of Revi'ai applies to all fruit trees or only to vineyards. Many Mishnayot, including our Mishnah, refer to Revi'ai as Kerem Reva'i, the Revi'i of a vineyard. Those who maintain that the halakha applies to all fruit trees hold that the text of the Mishnah should be Neta Reva'i, not Kerem Reva'i. I said Reva'i. So now the Mishnah says, Rabbi Yehuda says, En la'aved kochavim kerem reva'i, v'chachamim omrim yesh lo. Rabbi Yehuda says the produce of a goy is not subject to the laws of reva'i of vineyards, but the chachamim say yesh lo, it is subject to the laws of reva'i of the vineyards. And the Mefarshim explain both logics. According to the Mefarshim say Rabbi Yehuda cannot be referring to Eretz Yisrael because he rules in a different place that land owned by a non-Jew in Eretz Yisrael proper is fully sacred. Rather, he's referring to land in Syria, a country to the north of Eretz Yisrael, which was conquered by David HaMelech. In some respects, we learned this previously. In some respects, Syria is regarded under a rabbinic law, D'Rabbanan, as part of Eretz Yisrael, and in some respects, it's considered as a foreign country. Rabbi Yehuda holds that land owned by a goy in Syria is not subject to the laws of Eretz Yisrael and is therefore exempt from Kerem Reva'i. He's not talking about Eretz Yisrael proper, because we see in other places, he says land owned by a goy in Eretz Yisrael proper is fully sacred. V'chachamim omrim, but the sages say, Yesh lo, it's subject to Reva'i vineyards. According to the Chachamim, the produce of Syria, whether owned by a Jew or by a goy, is subject to the laws of Reva'i, because they hold that the Doraita laws of Reva'i are not limited to Eretz Yisrael, but apply in all lands, just like Olah does. The Mishnah now cites a machloket about the terumah separated by a goy from his own produce. Terumah ta'oved kochavim medama'at v'chayivim aleh chomesh v'Rabbi Shimon poter. If the terumah of an idolater falls into ordinary produce, it makes the mixture midumah, which is a forbidden mixture of terumah and chulin, which we learned earlier, you have to have 100 times more to permit it. V'chayivim aleh chomesh, and non-kohanim are obligated to pay the extra fifth for the sin of eating it by mistake if they ate it without realizing that it is terumah, because the Tanakama holds an idolater's terumah is biblically valid and therefore is treated like regular terumah in every respect. However, Rabbi Shimon poter, Rabbi Shimon disagrees about the fifth. Rabbi Shimon exempts one who ate it by mistake from having to pay the fifth, although he agrees that it makes ordinary produce meduma, because according to Rabbi Shimon, an idolatrous terumah is recognized only midrabanan, and the rabbis did not impose the penalty of fifth in this case. Now, the Mefarshim explain the halakha of paying a fifth is treated more leniently because it is not required to gain forgiveness, because it's only a monetary fine. So, like the previous Tana and the first Tana of our Mishnah, Rabbi Shimon holds that land owned by a goy in Eretz Yisrael is fully sacred and its produce is subject to the laws of Terumot and Maasrot. However, Rabbi Shimon holds that if a goy completes the processing of produce, he removes it from the biblical tithing obligation. Such produce requires tithing only midrabanan under rabbinic law, and the Rav tells us ven halacha Rabbi Shimon. The halacha does not follow Rabbi Shimon. Rather, if the terumah of a goy falls into ordinary produce, it makes a mixture meduma like everybody. But also the chayvim alei chomesh, non-kohanim are obligated to pay the extra fifth for the sin of eating it by mistake if they didn't realize what they were doing, because we hold like the Tana Kama, and idolatrous terumah is biblically valid and therefore is treated like a regular terumah in every respect. That is Rabotai of today's Mishna Yomi. Baruch Adonai leolam. Amen v'amen.